Krakow is a beautiful city with medieval streets, magnificent architecture, music, and centuries of history. Yet, only a short distance away lies Auschwitz-Birkenau, a place that became a symbol of humanity's darkest moments. Join me as I travel from Krakow to Auschwitz-Birkenau, a journey through history, remembrance, and honoring the lives behind the numbers. Jewish Krakow. Since the 13th century, Jews had lived in Krakow. By 1939, about 60,000 Jews, which is nearly 1 in 4 residents, called this city home. Here in Kazimierz, we walk past historic synagogues, courtyards, and streets that once echoed with Jewish life. The old synagogue, built in the 15th century, is the oldest surviving synagogue in Poland. The Nazi occupation. In September 1939, Nazi Germany invaded Poland. Under German occupation, Krakow's Jewish residents faced persecution, discrimination, and systematic loss of their rights and freedoms. They were forced to wear identifying symbols. Their businesses were taken away. Their children were banned from public schools. Their movement was restricted. Krakow became the capital of the German-controlled general government. To understand how the occupation reshaped the city, we walked to Wawel Castle, once a residence of Polish kings. It's difficult to imagine that this symbol of Polish identity became the center of Nazi rule in occupied Poland. From here, the Nazi administration made decisions that affected the lives of millions. Krakow Ghetto. Crossing the Vistula River into Podgorze, we enter the place where the Krakow Ghetto was established. In March 1941, the Nazis forced about 17,000 Jewish residents from their homes and confined them behind walls in an area built for only about 3,000 people. Families were separated. Food became scarce. Disease spread. Fear became part of everyday life. Standing in today's Platz Bohaterów Ghetto, or Hero Square, we see rows of empty bronze chairs. The chairs symbolize the furniture and belongings left behind when Jewish families were forced from their homes during the liquidation of the Krakow Ghetto in 1943. A reminder of the thousands of people whose lives were destroyed. Eagle Pharmacy. We continue through Podgorze to the Eagle Pharmacy. Inside the Krakow Ghetto, this small pharmacy became a place of assistance and refuge. It was owned by Tadeusz Pankiewicz, a Polish Catholic pharmacist, and the only non-Jewish Pole allowed to remain and operate a pharmacy inside the ghetto. Pankiewicz and his staff provided medicine, assistance, information, and documented what they witnessed during the occupation. In the middle of the Krakow Ghetto, the Eagle Pharmacy became a rare place where people could still find support. In 1947, Pankiewicz published his memories of those dark days in the Krakow Ghetto Pharmacy, leaving behind a vital, first-hand account of survival and resistance. Schindler's Factory. Not far from the Krakow Ghetto, we stand in front of Oskar Schindler's factory. Originally owned by Jewish businessmen, the factory was taken over by Schindler after the Nazi occupation through Aryanization, the forced transfer of Jewish-owned businesses. Known as Deutsche E-Mail-Warenfabrik, the factory produced enamelware and metal goods, including items for the German Warfare. At first, Schindler was a businessman seeking profit from wartime opportunities. But as he witnessed the persecution and murder of Jewish people, he began using his power to protect his workers. By claiming they were essential for production, bribing Nazi officials, and using his connections, Schindler saved about 1,200 Jewish workers from deportation and death. In 1944, as Soviet forces advanced and the Nazis began closing camps in occupied Poland, Schindler moved his factory to Brunlitz in German-occupied Czechoslovakia. His Jewish workers were transported there, where they survived until liberation in 1945. Standing here today, we remember the people whose lives were saved and the choices that made their survival possible. Auschwitz. The journey from Krakow to Auschwitz is about 70 kilometers and takes an hour and a half by road. Outside the window, the countryside is quiet. It is difficult to imagine that this peaceful landscape leads to a place where about 1.1 million people were murdered, of which 1 million victims were Jews. Among the Jewish victims were roughly 200,000 children. When Auschwitz opened in 1940, it was established as a concentration camp for Polish political prisoners. The first transport arrived on June 14, 1940, carrying 728 Polish prisoners from Tarnow. The Nazis chose this site because it already had abandoned Polish military barracks, a railway network, and ample room for expansion. Over time, Auschwitz grew into the largest camp complex in the Nazi system and one of the main centers of the Holocaust. Jews, Poles, Roma and Sinti, Soviet prisoners of war, prisoners from across Nazi-occupied Europe, all were subjected to violence, forced labor, starvation, and systematic dehumanization. For Jewish men, women, and children, Auschwitz became a place of mass murder. Many were killed soon after arrival. Others were selected for forced labor. The reality becomes clear as we walk through the camp. The wooden bunk beds reveal the conditions prisoners endured. The assembly yard reminds us of roll calls that lasted for hours in freezing winters and scorching summers. Inside Block 10, Nazi doctors carried out medical experiments, such as forced sterilization procedures on women. Block 11, known as the Death Block, contained starvation cells, standing cells, and underground punishment cells. Between Blocks 10 and 11 stands the execution wall, where thousands of prisoners, especially Polish political prisoners, were shot to death. One of the most difficult moments of the visit is entering the gas chamber in Crematorium 1. Here the Nazis used Cyclone B, which released poisonous hydrogen cyanide gas to murder prisoners. Standing inside this room, we think about the people who entered it and never came out. It feels as though the innocent victims are speaking directly to me, telling me of their fear, their hunger, their separation from their families, and the final moments of lives that should have continued. These are not simply historic buildings. They preserve the memory of people whose lives were taken far too soon. During his visit to Auschwitz in 1979, Pope John Paul II, who had lived through the Nazi occupation of Poland, said, "I have come and I kneel on this Golgotha of the modern world, on these tombs, largely nameless, like the great tomb of the unknown soldier. Standing here, I understand why. This is where humanity crucified itself through hatred. With the same humility, we honor those who were taken, remember the lives they should have lived, and carry their stories with us." Birkenau. Auschwitz I tells only part of the story. About 3 kilometers away is Auschwitz II-Birkenau, where the scale of the Holocaust becomes impossible to comprehend. We take the shuttle from Auschwitz I, and within minutes the landscape changes. The entrance gate, the railway tracks, rows of wooden barracks stretching into the distance. Built beginning in 1941, Birkenau covered more than 400 acres and became the largest part of the Auschwitz complex. It was also the main site of mass murder. As we walk along the railway tracks, we follow the path taken by hundreds of thousands of people, arriving in overcrowded cattle cars from across Nazi-occupied Europe. Many stepped off the trains carrying suitcases, believing they were being resettled. Within minutes, they faced selection. Some were chosen for forced labor. Many others, especially children, older adults, and those considered unable to work, were sent directly to the gas chambers. The Nazis built 4 crematoria with gas chambers here. Victims were murdered in the gas chambers, and their bodies were then burned in the crematoria. One of the most difficult stories to hear is that of the Sonderkommando. These were mostly Jewish prisoners, forced to work at the gas chambers and crematoria. Under the threat of death, they removed bodies and operated the crematoria as the Nazis tried to erase evidence of mass murder. On October 7, 1944, members of the Sonderkommando fought back. Using explosives secretly smuggled by women prisoners working in a nearby munitions factory, they damaged Crematorium 4 before the uprising was crushed. As we reach the ruins of the crematoria, we learn that before abandoning the camp, the Nazis destroyed documents and blew up the crematoria in an attempt to hide their crimes. But they failed. The ruins remain, the railway tracks remain. Standing here, we realize that no photograph can capture the scale of this place or the crimes committed here. Reflection. Auschwitz-Birkenau teaches us that evil does not begin with killing. It begins much earlier, with words, with prejudice, with turning away, and with convincing ourselves that someone else's suffering is not our concern. That is the real lesson. Yet again, in the words of Pope John Paul II, freedom consists not in doing what we like, but in having the right to do what we ought. What we ought to do is clear: protect human dignity, speak when others are silenced, defend the weak when they are targeted. We must remember that this planet has not been gifted to one race, one religion, or one nation. It is for all of us to share. If Auschwitz-Birkenau teaches anything, it is that silence can be as dangerous as cruelty, and indifference can be as deadly as hatred.